Good afternoon. It's 3 o'clock. It must be Demolition Daily time. Regular watchers will know that we usually do a bit of a long rambling intro in which I get myself up to speed and then we welcome guests on. But we actually have a special guest today that's already standing by. So without further ado, I'm going to bring him into the live stream. Just joining us now is Lawrence Waterman. He is the chairman of the British Safety Council. Lawrence, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. One of the things that I think has really become evident over the course of the COVID-19 outbreak is this confusion over what is essential and what is non-essential work. We've got a lot of construction and demolition workers still going to work, and yet they're still being required to try and work at 2 meters distance. What is the current guidance that's coming from the British Safety Council?
Okay, and I think the lack of clear guidance centrally is an issue for all of us all the time for almost everything. The only thing that's really clear is the 2 meters. And that's to do with making sure that people don't accidentally touch each other and end up with kind of hand to face contact transferring the virus. But we know that if someone coughs or sneezes in a confined space that's a lot bigger than 2 meters distant, you're still going to be in trouble. So the lack of clear guidance for demolition and construction workers is of a piece rather than a kind of oppressive reality just for us and our colleagues. I think that the key thing for the British Safety Council is that we think that all health and safety issues, and COVID-19 is no different, are always better dealt with when people are able to talk to each other about what the problem is and what the solutions might be. So we're in favour of managers and workers having conversations about the essential nature of the work and also about the way in which that work can be done, minimising the risk, including, because of the particular nature of this risk, including the journey to work, rather than just thinking about it on site itself. So we would be in favour of not saying there's a particular rule that everyone's got to abide by, other than the rule of discussing this like grown-ups and everyone treating everyone else's concerns and fears with proper respect.
I think that's one of the things one of the other things that's come out of this entire crisis. Obviously, construction and demolition is a multi-tiered, a multi-layered system. So you have a principal contractor or a main contractor and subcontractors below that. And we've heard lots of instances in this past week where demolition contractors have assessed the risks and have decided it's probably best not to be on the site or to be working in the way they are. And they are being pressured and in some instances bullied by principal contractors, tier one contractors, or possibly even the clients to say, no, you crack on, you're contracted to do this job. And if you don't do the job in the time allocated, then we will come down on you like a ton of bricks.
Well, COVID-19 is force majeure. So I think all contractors, when they're looking at their own contracts, ought to have a bit more confidence and maybe have a useful solicitor on the telephone occasionally to reassure them that there is a justification. I think it's not very different from when a client's saying, surely you can hang from a skyhook in order to do that. Or a principal contractor saying, I know that the access equipment hasn't been completed yet and we don't have the certificate and it hasn't got the SCAF tag on it, but nevertheless it's really important that you get up there to do that inspection to let us know exactly what you're planning and what your estimates are. And the better contractors and the workers that really know what the risks are in our sector are always the ones that say, now hang on a minute, you want us to do this job and we want to be here tomorrow to do the next job as well. And so there are certain things that our knowledge and expertise tells us we've just got to, take a pause, take 5, wait until that scaffolding is in a fit state to access or whatever it might be. And I don't think that COVID-19 ought to be treated as completely differently from the way in which the competent demolition contractor all his operating life has been used to saying, my professional expertise, which you are paying for, which is why you've got me on this job, tells me that this is the right way to do things. And what you're asking at the moment is not the right way. And we just need to talk through how we can bridge the gap so that my guys are going to be safe and you're going to get your job done.
Yeah, you mentioned at the outset there the message is coming from government. I totally agree with what you're saying, and it is of a piece. That is the way that bureaucracy tends to work. But I as far as I'm concerned, given what you've just said, a risk assessment would surely suggest that most sites should be closed. And even when you're watching the governmental briefings of an evening, the podium in front of them actually says, "Stay at home, save lives." And yet, construction and demolition seems to have this weird exemption almost regardless.
Well, I think the problem is that you've got to allow the professionals, our people, to make the judgments, because if someone says to you, you've got to stop work, and your response is, we're 3/4 of the way through the demolition of a structure, and if we leave the site at the moment, we wouldn't leave it like this for a Christmas closure, let alone for what might be 2 or 3 months. So I think part of the problem is an honest one, that if you try to impose a rule, no more construction or no more demolition, we'll end up with accidents, with structures that are not safe. And also some of the work that's going on, I mean, actually it was building workers as well as people that were involved in getting the medical equipment properly connected up. That means that wonderful new hospital at XL, the Nightingale, is operational now. So there is always going to be some work that is to do with essential maintenance. Even if the building itself is not going to be occupied, you know very well that during a fortnight Christmas closure, you end up with facilities management people that are running water out of dead legs, people that are making sure that boilers are safe, doing all kinds of stuff. And then you've got roadworks, and it's easy to say, well, actually, these roads don't matter very much and we can let them go. We've got enough bloody potholes in the country to show that that's part of the policy. But nevertheless, we've got emergency services that need to get around, which means that as individuals and professionally in their work. So that means that we've got rail and road and other infrastructure connections that need to continue to be maintained, even if you have a conversation about further development and new build and new development. So I think it's right that the industry is challenged. We want you to stay at home if possible. We want you to stay safe. If you can't stay at home, honor the 2 meters and think about disinfection if you're sharing equipment or whatever. But ultimately, I mean, I think there has got to be what there is, a bit of respect for our industry and saying, what the situation is. We're going to, I hope, be a little bit more honest and open about how this disease gets transferred, so that people have got a better understanding of how to do their own risk assessments. But ultimately, it's got to be people in our industry with real understanding of the work and its essential nature who are in the best position to make the judgment about, we're going to mothball this site, but we're going to do this work to make it safe before we mothball it, or this work needs to continue for these reasons. And I've got we've got a couple of million people that work in our sector, and they're not all numpties. They're not all bureaucrats. They're not all just looking at the bottom line. There's a lot of very decent people, the overwhelming majority, working in our industry. And I think that we ought to trust them. But I think it would be helpful if the government was a little bit clearer and more explicit on the input side of how to do the risk assessment. If you were handling a toxic substance or thinking about tetanus on a site, or leptospirosis, Files disease from rat pee, if you were doing that, you'd be looking at the nature of the organism and the way that it can be stored, how long it would last outside the body, how it can be transmitted, how you can protect people with the right kind of protective gear and the right kind of hygiene arrangements. The trouble is that because people haven't sat down, they do all this spinning about, we're going to do thousands of tests yesterday and all of that. If there was clearer descriptions of exactly what the disease is, how that virus lives out in the environment, and how it can be transmitted by coughing, by sneezing, and by physical contact with the bug that's been left by someone else touching the same surface. I think that our people who are really knowledgeable, you look at the accident rate in our industry, it's been going down year after year. If we're given the right information, I think our people can do risk assessments and make judgments that will result in the people that have to carry on doing demolition and construction work being safer in the process. And that's why I would recommend, I know it's going to sound like an advert, Mark, but I would recommend that people go to the British Safety Council website, as well as others, But the British Safety Council website's got a lot of information about the nature of the bug, the arrangements for keeping people safe in workplaces, because after all, we want our healthcare workers to carry on working. There's a lot of information out there, and we've gathered it together and made it available. And for our members, there's a telephone helpline, there's sort of online FAQs and all of that. I think if people just do a little bit of research like they would do if it was a new normal workplace risk, like a new wonder material like asbestos was 150 years ago, I think how people would be able to manage the risk and drive down that risk so that our people could do their essential work and not come to harm as a result.
It's hard to see beyond. It's hard to see beyond the weekend at the moment. I'm struggling to even remember what day of the week it is. But looking forward, I mean, and I think that is the secret to health and safety is planning. What do we take away from this? How will the landscape change when all of this is over and done with? What can we all learn?
I think one of the things that has been happening, and I mentioned it ought to happen more, is that there is a lot more talking about risk where everyone is involved. Instead of just being I'm the manager, I'm going to give you the rules, here's the procedure, you follow it, and I'll kick you up the rear end if I can see you doing something that isn't quite right. There's a lot more talking about it because no one feels 100% confident that they've got it completely taped. I mean, from the most senior medical advisor through to the most junior nurse in the hospital, everyone is nervous at the moment. And because of that, there's a lot more talking about how do you protect yourself? How do you protect your colleagues? What's the right way to do the work? I think that level of engagement, coupled with something else that I'm going to mention, but that level of engagement, I think we could continue that into the new world and be much more honest and open with each other and treat each other with enough respect to have those conversations. The other big thing that's happening is that a lot of construction workers are laid off. I mean, a lot of them have been furloughed or are taking the self-employed coin when it eventually gets distributed. A lot of people working for their own very small businesses are currently exploring with the bank how they can keep their business afloat for the next couple of months or whatever. I think what will happen over the coming weeks is that a lot more people will be making use of Mates in Mind. Now, this was launched a couple of years ago, thinking about the fact that construction workers are actually in the top 10. One of the areas we don't want to be in the top 10 for, like accidents, we're in the top 10 for suicides. I mean, apart from being an isolated farmer, it's difficult to find another employment where people have such a burden working away from home, dealing with all the money troubles that we have, the insecurity of the work. This phase is coming to an end. I'm going to lose my job, not because I'm being sacked, but because there's no more work on this site. When am I going to get my next start? And am I going to be able to pay the bills? And I haven't seen my wife for a week because I'm living in digs. All of that stuff creates a tremendous mental health burden on all of us. And what we want to be is healthy and feeling well in ourselves. So Mates in Mind was launched thinking about all that mental ill health problem. And actually, at the moment, a lot of companies are beginning to make use of those facilities to keep in touch with their staff who are at home with lower income, worrying about the health of their family members. I mean, there are all kinds of problems. And unlike being able to go on site and, josh a bit with your mates and maybe have a pint in the evening, we're all kind of isolated in our family groups. And, there's nothing more depressing than daytime television, is there? So,
as I've discovered.
So I think, obviously your show's a complete exception to that.
Wow, absolutely.
I think that a lot of people in our industry are going to make use of that Mates in Mind facility to work out ways of being friendly, helpful, supportive to their colleagues. And they're going to discover how easy it is to have conversations about well-being, about looking after ourselves, about caring for ourselves and our families. And I think that is going to be a permanent change in our industry. We've been an industry that shut up, head down, arse in the air, got on with your job, however badly you're feeling. How are you, George? I'm fine. And that is the answer, whatever the situation. I think that's going to change a bit. And I think that Mates in Mind, and there are, there's Samaritans and all sorts of other facilities, but Mates in Mind specially designed for our industry great website, telephone helpline, materials for small businesses to send out to their staff on iPhones and all of that. There's loads of stuff that's available, and I think we're going to become an industry that puts its arm around itself and looks after itself a lot better than maybe it's done in the past. So I think there is, it's an ill wind that doesn't blow any good, and I think that might be one of the positive changes that comes out of this.
I hope you're right. I mean, certainly on our Demolition magazine, we actually have an advert, a free advert for Our Mates in Mind in every issue. So we're very supportive of those. But I think one of the things that I would say with that is we've already identified the fact that demolition men, and it is generally men that we're talking about here, demolition men aren't particularly good at, as you say, putting their arm around each other and confessing up to having problems. Is that more likely to happen now that they're isolated, or are we going to go back with a new sort of hippy dippy feel about being kinder to the world when all this is over?
No, well, I think one of the things that the small companies can do is just encourage their staff maybe once a week to phone up each other. I mean, there's a lot of use of Skype and Zoom and all of that going on at the moment. I mean, I work in a consultancy called Park Health and Safety that came together originally for London 2012, and we just stayed working together, mainly concentrating on health, but with safety as well, and mainly concentrating on construction, working on projects like HS2 and all of that. And one of the things that we've been doing is Friday evening, we have a Friday evening drink. So we actually get together, I think it's called Microsoft Teams, but there's loads of these different packages available. And all that happens is that you end up, some people aren't on camera because, they're in their dressing gowns or they've just got out the shower or whatever, although that might make it more interesting. Although probably not, not
at this end, it wouldn't, trust me.
But no, seriously, some people are just on the phone. Some people have got the camera as well. And you just end up in a group with a feeling of being a party, a feeling of being together socially, like you might do going to a pub on a Thursday evening for a pint. Because that's often the end of the week drink, because Friday evening it's sort of get home and you're with your family for the weekend.
Sure.
So we do that on a Friday evening, and it's only for an hour, and people can talk about anything. They can talk about, model making, show pictures, on video of each other's dogs. I mean, all kinds of, and there's a little bit of, what was the last job you were doing and how are we keeping in contact with clients that we work with customers and all of that. But mainly it's just social and the sense that you're part of a team and everyone's looking out for each other. I think that sort of feeling maybe is going to be something that happens a bit more and gets shared. And maybe there'll be the attitude that when all this comes to some sort of conclusion eventually, maybe we don't want to lose all of that maybe there can still be a degree of contact. And one of the things that employers, managers can do is just encourage their guys to just keep in contact with each other. They don't have to phone their manager, for heaven's sake, but just to talk to people that previously were their workmates and just do that sort of touching in. Are you okay? Is everyone all right? Any problems? Do you want to have a chat? And just be friendly. I think we are potentially a very friendly industry. And I think maybe we could just encourage that a bit more.
Well, I sincerely hope you're right, Lawrence. That sounds like perfect advice. Look, just to explain to everyone that's watching, Lawrence actually came on with about 30 seconds notice today. So I'm going to thank him for giving up his valuable time. I do appreciate that, Lawrence. Hopefully next time I speak to you, it'll be in slightly more or less chaotic circumstances, but I really appreciate you joining us today.
It's been a pleasure, Mark. Thank you very much for calling me. Thank you.
All the very best.
Take care.
Right, so as I said before, Lawrence very kindly joined us. The show is a little bit arse about face. It's going to be a bit disjointed. I reached out to Lawrence and his team at the British Safety Council literally first thing this morning. We batted it backwards and forwards. I've also got a call in with an expert on employment law, because one of the things that keeps coming up as a question to me is talking about the job retention scheme, what it means to be a furloughed employee rather, and frankly, I'm out of my comfort zone doing a live stream. I'm even more out of my comfort zone talking about employment law. So I'd much rather get a guest on to talk about that. There is a possibility that one will be joining us. I'm going to be keeping an eye on our green room, and if he does, I'll just drop everything and get him straight on. But in the meantime, I just want to go back to what Lawrence was saying there about, hopefully we'll all be that little bit friendlier and a little bit kinder when all of this blows over, because I do think we are, by and large, we are being pretty supportive of each other. I spent this morning writing or preparing for writing my weekly newsletter. If you're not aware, we do a weekly email blast called This Week in Demolition. It goes out first thing on a Monday morning to something like 60,000 people around the world, thereabouts. This week, as it always does, covers a very broad spectrum, but no great surprise. The main topic is coronavirus and the fallout from it. I'm making a point in these shows to try and, as I termed it, look up, not look down, try and take some positives out of all of this. And I am starting to believe, much as Lawrence has just indicated there, that the COVID-19 crisis could actually be the dawning of what I'm currently terming Demolition 2.0. The next generation of the industry. There's no question that the coronavirus and the pandemic will have given the industry an almighty shake. And so I think some would agree that maybe it needed it, maybe not in such a catastrophic and deadly way, but I think the industry has been in need of a bit of a shake-up. It's been a bit stuck in its own ways, caught in a rut for a very, very long time. And I do think that, we do have an opportunity now to renew the industry, to recalibrate and to do things in a new way, or to do new things in a new way. And that itself is going to cover a broad spectrum as well. I hope that when all this blows over, that the industry will reconsider and focus upon its duty of care to employees. As Lawrence rightly stated just then, the messages coming from government and from the health service have not been particularly clear. But ultimately, the conduit between the government and the health experts and the individual workers are their managers and their directors. And I think one of the things that we need to take away from this is the way that we communicate, the way we, as Lawrence very, very nicely put it, put our arms around each other. I'm a football fan. Well, I'm a West Ham fan, which not necessarily the same thing. One of the things that I've watched over the years is the way that managers have managed different people, because we are all individuals and we all require a different approach. And one that always sticks in my mind is West Ham many years ago signed a mercurial, and for mercurial I mean barking mad, player called Paolo Di Canio. He'd already been banned from one club. He'd been kicked out of another. The guy was a loose cannon, an extraordinary football talent, but an absolute loose cannon. And at the time, Harry Redknapp was the West Ham manager, and he managed to get for 3 or 4 seasons of absolutely brilliant performance out of Di Canio. And it was purely down to man management. It was almost a case of, well, I'll manage the entire team in one way, and I'll manage Paolo in a different way. And it worked. And I think that needs to be replicated within demolition companies. You will have those guys that they like to laugh and joke about and pop down the pub together, and then you will have the ones that are a bit more quiet, maybe a little more studious, bit more introvert. They require managing in a different way, and particularly at a time like now. I also hope we take a long, hard look at the way that we actually employ our workers as well. As I mentioned in previous shows, including yesterday's, I think, we have over the years gradually eroded the employed base of the industry, particularly here in London. And we've got a lot of self-employed, self-funded workers out there. We've got a lot of agency workers out there that don't get the same rights as employed people. I would like to think that when all this blows over, we will start to retract from that and actually get a few more guys on a regular wage, regular employment, and all that goes with it. I also hope it means new efficiencies, embracing new technology. Yesterday's show, which is how this show should have started, but obviously we were slightly interrupted there. Yesterday's show was by far our most popular to date, still racking up views, particularly over on Instagram television or IGTV, on Demolition News there. And that was talking about connected sites and smart construction and all the good things that go with it. As I've said before, we do have an opportunity right now to recalibrate, rethink and retarget. And I do think it's the companies that are looking ahead, that are being sharp and pivoting when they can, particularly at a time when a lot of work isn't going on. Those are the ones that are going to shine in the future. And ultimately, I hope this means an end to the age of selfishness and ruthlessness, and putting wealth before health. I'd like to think that this could be the dawning of a new age of collaboration, of working together, looking out for each other. All seems a horribly long way off right now. And when I committed to doing these every day, I didn't have any notion as to how long they were likely to last. We're 10 days in. This is the end of our second week, and there's no end in sight. But I will be here again next week. I think one of the other things that's really struck me is we can work towards that post-COVID-19 pandemic and crisis and possible recession now. We can't do a great deal of work, as we've explained. There's a lot of sites that are closed. Even those that aren't closed, we can only run at half capacity because we can't put as many men on there as perhaps we would like to do. But what we can do is work today on things like reputation. And I do think a reputation that we earn today will be remembered and celebrated and rewarded when all of this is over. And I'll give you a particular example. I've just realised I'm wearing a bell hat today. I've actually got a JCB hat hanging up on the wall behind me. I probably should have been wearing that. There's been a lot of talk in the press about various companies. I know Elon Musk's Tesla company has done a lot of work on ventilators in the States. And I know JCB are working on the housings for ventilators here in the UK, which, a great achievement. One thing that is probably less well known is the fact that JCB have put in place an aid scheme here in the UK and in India, where JCB has got a big manufacturing plant and where they're incredibly busy and incredibly popular. They put in place an aid scheme that will feed almost 40,000 people a week during the COVID crisis. And those people, that will include vulnerable people, homeless people, and NHS workers. Now, as a journalist, I'm required to be objective and unbiased. But I personally, hand on heart, I think that's an incredible response. And I really hope that other people remember the contribution that JCB and others are making at this time. I'd like to think that they will reap the rewards of that altruism and that selfishness when all of this is blown over. And I hope other people do likewise as well. One final point before I call it a day and let you all get on with your weekends. One of the most striking things at the recent ConExpo exhibition, which is where I picked up the new hat, was this drive towards new technology and connected sites and smart construction and apps and all the stuff that goes with it. I spent a lot of time on the Caterpillar site, on the Caterpillar stand rather, the Liebherr stand, the Case stand, Hyundai, Doosan, Volvo, Uncle Tom Cobley and all, and everybody, all the major manufacturers and a good many of the smaller manufacturers now have apps and telematics systems and fleet management systems and all that kind of thing. So we came back, and I must admit it's come together rather more quickly, and I guess that's a reflection of the fact that we've had time on our hands. We wanted to recognize that and to celebrate that and to share more of that kind of information. It doesn't really belong on our Demolition News website or in the Demolition News or Demolition magazine, although we will be touching on it. It doesn't really belong on our Diggers and Dozers website or in the Diggers and Dozers magazine, although we will be touching on it. I personally believe that it needed something completely focused, completely dedicated. So we have started a new website. Very early days, there's probably no more than about 20 stories on there, but we are kicking that off. You're the first people, if you're watching this now, you're the first people that have heard about it outside of these four walls. These very small four walls. The new site is called Tech for Sites. It's TECH, Tech for FOR Sites, SITES.com, techforsites.com. Given the response to yesterday's show, which was talking primarily about technology and the uses thereof, I think you'll like it. It is a new departure for us. There's a lot of new stuff for us to learn, a lot of new stuff for us to explore, but it is an interesting area. And again, going back to what we've learned over the past couple of weeks, one of the arguments for sending men and women onto construction and demolition sites at the moment is the fact that you can't do construction at home. Well, that's not strictly true. I recently went on to, at an office in Birmingham here in the UK, and I was driving very badly, but I was driving a Caterpillar dozer that was in Arizona. Now, I saw I was driving it. I drove it about 10 yards forward, about 10 yards back, turned the lights on and off just to prove that it was me controlling it. But that technology exists now. And as our guest yesterday, Hoppy, was explaining, that technology does have the potential to change the way that we do demolition. And what better chance to change the way we do demolition than right now, when we're all thinking about where our next job is coming from, be it a contract or an actual job if you're a demolition worker. So go over techforsites.com. Hope you like it. Let us know. We'd love to hear what you think of it. But that's pretty much our show complete today, and that's our second week of live streams complete as well. I've no idea how long these are going to last. I probably naively said that I was going to do one of these every day. Didn't realise quite how involved they would be, chasing around after guests literally minutes before you go on air. Very stressful, but I think rewarding. I think Lawrence was great value today. Really appreciated him being here. One thing I can assure you is, so long as this pandemic goes on, and so long as I can stay healthy, we will be here every day, 3 o'clock. That's our commitment to you. As an industry, demolition has been very good to us over the years. This is our chance to give a little something back, and hopefully to help shape that new collaborative, friendly, arm around the shoulder industry of the future. So I'll back here again on Monday. Hopefully we'll have another guest on board. We've got a couple lined up for later in the week, but hopefully we'll have one for Monday as well. In the meantime, as always, stay safe, look after yourselves, look after your colleagues, look after your families, stay well, and I'll see you again next week. And thanks ever so much for watching. All the very best.